Good evening, this is the Oscar expert here with Brother Bro. And it's time for our top 10 films of the 2022 Sundance Film Festival. Some of these we did review in full, and a couple others we did not. And without further ado, what is your top 10, buddy?
Well, my number 10 is Good Luck to You, Leo Gran. This film had a really positive message that is hard to not be moved by. And while it was maybe too straightforward at times, it's one really worth celebrating. And it's about how we should all do what we can to give ourselves the joy and the pleasure that we think we deserve. Got two great lead performances in there. Emma Thompson, maybe she's coming for a Golden Globe, I don't know, but she's great in it. And it was the finale that really solidified its place in my 10. A breezy watch that anyone could enjoy.
My number 10 is Emily the Criminal. Not only was this an edge-of-your-seat, tightly paced thriller with an excellent lead performance from Aubrey Plaza, the film's ideas about internalized criminality and how that can become part of your identity I think are still resonating with me. This is a really easy one to enjoy, so when you do get a chance to see it, I would definitely recommend it.
My number 9 is Navalny, a documentary thriller about a man in Russia who, after a failed assassination attempt against him, seeks to further expose the Russian government. Some of you may already know who this man is. He's very famous in Russia, leading an opposition movement against the current powers and Putin. And this is just a riveting documentary that I would have a hard time seeing anybody not enjoy. And there is an unforgettable crank call scene that I think is just going to leave people's jaws on the floor. It won a really good prize at Sundance, and it's currently holding a 4.0 on LETTERBOXD, actually.
Is it?
Yeah, I just really don't see anybody not liking this. And it is a memorable film about political corruption and trying to understand Russia as an example of how this might operate. Makes me wonder, about our own deep state here in the US or really in any other country. It doesn't go into those things, but it does feel really important. And I hope this is in contention next year for documentary feature.
I'm going to cheat a little bit. And I'm going to put in two documentaries into the number 9 slot, Navalny and Aftershock.
That's cheating.
It's cheating, but I wanted to put them both in, and we didn't review them, so I want to talk about them.
You just have the top 11 now. Okay?
10 is an arbitrary number that everybody somehow decided upon.
Well, we have 10 fingers. I think that's the real thrust of it.
That actually
really
could
probably
be
came from, we count in tens. We have 10 fingers.
That actually might be true, but I'm counting in 11s today. Everything you said about Navalny, I agree with. In addition, I just loved learning about this man and what he represents to these people. I also really enjoy getting to know Navalny a little bit up close and how he felt about the movement that he's leading and how much he's willing to sacrifice. Really powerful documentary. And then Aftershock, which examines the US's abhorrent birth mortality rates for black women. The movie makes a really good case for how this is undeniably an issue that we should all be looking at more and caring more about. It had some really emotionally powerful moments, and it's definitely one I don't think I'll forget anytime soon.
My number 8 is Resurrection, which we both did a review for. It's a psychological thriller sort of horror that stars Rebecca Hall in what is, I think, the standout performance of the entire festival. Rebecca Hall is absolutely amazing here. She's playing an emotionally scarred mother in this film, and it dives really deep into her trauma. It goes so far that it might abandon some viewers, but others like me were just fully wrapped in. I loved how far it went, and then it didn't tell you exactly what to think or what to feel about what was taking place. And they made you understand where the character was coming from first and foremost, in a very deep way of what emotional abuse can look like and how it can affect the mind years to come. Also a really savory but disturbing Tim Roth performance. Highly recommend this thought-provoking film.
My number 8 is A Love Song. This is a very quiet, contained little movie.
Tiny little movie.
It is a tiny little movie, though.
You can put a cherry on it.
It is a little bit of a tiny
movie. A
movie.
little dash of whipped cream.
But I liked it in its tininess. Really strong lead performance from Dale Dickey. It's beautifully shot, well directed, and even though it was a little slow to start, it really ended up moving me by the end. I loved how it shows how love comes and goes and the beauty and the grief that all comes with that experience. Also a really good performance by Wes Studi.
My number 7 is Aftershock, which is about the black birth mortality rate. It makes a case for change that absolutely can't be ignored. There are some statistics in here that are astonishing. It also tells the story of the US healthcare system as one that is rooted in racism, and I think that that's a really interesting connection to make to why this is still an issue today. This is the first of 2 documentaries in here that I think draws the lines from the past to the present really well and shows that we're still in this like domino chain from the days of slavery. And while it can be very difficult to see the solution to a lot of these problems, it does provide an example of an alternative institution. Very vital, moving, and powerful documentary.
My number 7 is Duel. Riley Stern's follow-up to The Art of Self-Defense did not disappoint me. Thought this movie was hilarious, got some LOLs out of me, which can be hard to do. But the sense of humor here, the dark, dry absurdism, was right up my alley. And in addition, the movie's portrait of this absurdist world, maybe didn't resonate deeply with me, but it made me appreciate the movie beyond just the humor. I like hopping on board a Riley Stern's vehicle. You never know where you're going with it. He's always taken the story in unpredictable directions, and I'm just excited to keep watching movies from him every few years.
My number 6 is Master. I like this film more than anybody else that I think I know. I'm very forgiving of the fact that, I do agree that some of the horror stuff is muddied into the real life horrors and we don't really need to mix them. But I was so sympathetic to what the film was trying to do and what it was aiming for in the third act that it totally got me. It makes a really bleak case for college institutions and their ability to progress beyond like what, they kind of have always been, which is serving, white society disproportionately to other races. And I love that they portrayed 2 sides of a coin for these black women who attempt to work within the system. I think it definitely reflects the US as a whole, and I encourage people to look beyond, what they might see as like slights or faults in the storytelling, because I just have absolutely like no qualms with the message, and it made me see those institutions in a way that I hadn't before. Really got me understanding on a deep level how it can be very traumatizing to attempt to change a system and to be the quote unquote face for that change.
My number 6 is also Master. I didn't appreciate this one so much for the scares, although I think that the horror atmosphere definitely does the movie some favors. But this movie did a great job putting you in the shoes of people who are some of the only black people on their campus, and it shows how beaten down they can feel by that. From what I read, this is something that the director herself experienced, and also said she had friends experiencing the same thing. It's kind of a universal experience for a lot of black students on campuses. This sort of ever-present feeling that they're not quite welcome or accommodated at the campus, despite the campus putting up the front that they're oh so diverse and inclusive. This movie brought me closer to understanding what that experience could be like for somebody, and it feels uncompromising in terms of the resolution. It doesn't feel like it's being made to please anybody. It feels like a genuine expression of dismay at the state of things. I found it to be very thought-provoking and layered. It's one I might not even mind revisiting.
My number 5 is When You Finish Saving the World. Yet another film, along with Master, that I liked a lot more than most people, apparently. But I genuinely feel like, both of these really can and I think they will find their audience. I would not be turned off by the reviews. I don't think I'm like some anomaly for really thinking these are very good movies. This one has Finn Wolfhard and Julianne Moore in the leading roles. It's about a mother and son who sort of have a failure to communicate. Jesse Eisenberg brings a sort of dry humor you might expect from him. I thought this was a really funny movie, and it really capitalizes on like cringe comedy. I think you have to remain unjudgmental about the characters to some extent, which could be hard for some people because they're portrayed as being very self-absorbed. But I think that for me, the humor let me ease into that and then even look past it in the end and discover what the film was truly saying about them. I had a really valuable takeaway from this one. I hope people are not discouraged by the reviews to check this one out.
My number 5 is also When You Finish Saving the World. I was really impressed with Jesse Eisenberg's writing abilities. I thought he was very perceptive. Okay. Woo! And he was very willing to confront these characters in a way where he's not trying to get you to like them, he's just trying to get us to see ourselves in them. And it seems like some people have had a hard time doing that, but honestly, I do think everybody has some qualities of these people, how self-absorbed they are, perhaps in a more exaggerated way than most people are, but it's almost like part of the human condition, isn't it, that we can only truly know ourselves, and connecting with people outside of that bubble can be very difficult and sometimes result in some really funny, like, cringe humor in here, like you were saying. It reminds me a little bit of movies like 8th Grade or Lady Bird. I wouldn't put it on the pedestal of those movies, but it did have that sort of appeal for me. Finn Wolfhard and Julianne Moore especially are really good in this movie. So, the haters gonna hate, but I really liked it.
My number 4 is Duel, which is a standout, if nothing else, for its unique, twisted, dark, and extremely dry humor. And the way that it reflects the world is it shows that we might be very similar to these characters, and showing how us going through like the routines and the mundanity of life is kind of like our fight for survival. Like we're almost doing it just because. It's just funny when a film can take life and kind of like strip away the meaning of it and then make you kind of see that like, oh, that is sort of true to how life can be. And I also really like to laugh. You know, everybody likes to have a good chuckle. This film offered me many a chuckle. And yeah, apparently not for everybody, but it really worked for me.
My number 4 is Descendant. This is my highest ranked documentary from the festival. It's about the search for the remains of the last slave ship to ever arrive at the US. It's also about the community who descended from the people from this ship who all live in this place called Africa Town. And it really examines like step by step how these people got to the conditions that they're in and how that resulted directly from their ancestors' arrival here. It makes a very convincing case that the effects that slavery still has on people living in this country are undeniable. And the people who live in this community, like they can walk around town and like point to things. The history is kind of right in front of them. The movie exists like in the past and the present almost simultaneously, where the ghost of the past is always kind of surrounding these characters, and they're also trying to figure out what exactly their past was and what their history was. And you understand why it's so important for them to want to keep their history alive and to continue to tell it. One of the shocking things in this movie is the same family who brought these slaves over, like, still owns a lot of companies that are doing harm to this community. It was also an interesting look at racial disparities in the South in particular. It also dives into some of the false mythology that they teach down there. This documentary ended up covering a lot of ground, and it's coming to Netflix. They bought that, so I hope it gets an Oscar campaign. I think it will, and I would highly recommend watching this one.
My number 3 is After Yang, which you don't have on here because you saw it at Cannes.
Yeah, I wanted to put new movies on here, but it would have been in the top 10.
This film was written and directed by Kogonada, who did Columbus, which is a movie that I really liked. And this is not a disappointment whatsoever. It absolutely establishes Kogonada as being one of the most exciting filmmakers right now. Like Columbus, this is a really slow, meditative, beautifully paced film. I think people will latch on to different pieces of this film because it is really broad in its scope. That might actually be the thing that holds it back a little bit for me. Like maybe I wanted to hone in on something a little bit more specific, but this is such a strong piece of filmmaking. It depicts the future and science fiction in a way that I haven't seen. I love that it acknowledges that a lot of our technology is about connection, and it is at least like trying to simulate warmth. A lot of sci-fi just seems really tempted to depict robots as being very cold and obviously unfeeling. Like maybe that's fair for robots to be unfeeling, but I just don't think that's the reality. I think there's always a dichotomy to it. We create things in our own image, and we do welcome a lot of technology into our life because it enhances our social lives and our connections and relationships with one another. I know it's tempting to be all dystopian, but that is kind of the reality of it.
This movie does for robots what E.T. did for aliens.
The production design did also not disappoint from Columbus. Columbus, I think they utilized actual locations and architecture. And then this film, which has its own budget to create that architecture and let its own imagination run wild, is just sumptuous eye candy.
Should get a production design nomination.
Yeah. And that way it towered over a lot of the Sundance films with how unique its look was. I think you're going to see footage from this pulled over and over again in compilations where like Joaquin Phoenix is walking around the city in Her, or like maybe there's some footage in The Tree of Life, just because I think it's some of the shots are on par with that level of beauty. And I really love how they visually portrayed Yang's memory. So I don't really have a specific takeaway or an angle on this one, and I would like to watch it again to see if I come away with something like that, but it is definitely one of the must-sees of the year.
Number 3 is God's Country. We didn't actually review this one, so I might talk about it a little bit more. This is a really, really well-paced, slow-burn thriller starring Tandy Newton. This is one of the best directed movies I've seen at Sundance, and well-edited films, because it slows down so that it can give everything its own little beat. Every moment was there to heighten the tension, and every moment of silence felt important. The film's about a college professor who lives in Wyoming, and she's the only black woman in her town for miles. The film's about the tension that develops between her and 2 hunters who keep using her property to hunt against her will. The way that the tensions in this film escalate between her and others in her town really reflect, I think, the state of America today in ways that made me feel kind of confused and sad, but also challenged. And it didn't paint a one-dimensional portrait of either of these sides, even though I think there's one that your empathy is supposed to lie with more. But it does a great job showcasing like these clashing perspectives and worldviews, people who come from different pasts, different areas. I think the film did a great job developing its lead character. We learn a lot about her going on that makes her just even more interesting and complex. We understand more about like where her motivations might be coming from these decisions that she's making, which some of them might seem baffling, but the more you understand her, you get where she's coming from, at least emotionally. Tanyue Newton's performance is easily one of the best I saw at Sundance. She's really incredible in this, and apparently this might be her last acting gig. The film, as I said, is challenging and uncomfortable at times, but it never loses you in its grip because it does such a good job reflecting our current state of affairs. My number 2 is the film that has the most buzz that won the Audience Award. Cha-Cha Real Smooth, written, directed by, and starring Cooper Raiff. This film is undeniably charming. That's why everybody likes it. It's funny, it's romantic, it's heartfelt. It's everything that you want from Sundance. Like, you want that one movie that just steals your heart. Often that one is like a coming of age film, and this one is about a man in his early 20s, but it definitely plays like one. Someone who's sort of aimless, like looking for their purpose in life, sees the life of this 30-something woman and feels compelled to be a part of that. It's almost enough that this film just has Cooper Raiff's charisma all over it, minus any sort of storytelling at all. It's just thoroughly enjoyable to watch that character come alive. Dakota Johnson also gives a great performance, and their chemistry just makes you really desire them to be together as a couple. And the film's really about trying to see whether or not that makes sense. And I really like where it ended up there. I didn't think it was totally predictable. It challenges how you see the characters within this relationship in a way that felt revelatory. And I think this is a really easy film to connect with and take something away from. I can't really share what part of it I specifically liked and connected with because I just don't want to spoil the movie. But definitely rush to see this one. And don't forget to bring some means of absorption for the tears you might shed. My number 2 is Resurrection. I was gripped throughout this psychological thriller. It really committed to putting you into this character's perspective. You really understand her emotional state throughout her descent into madness. What I love about this film is just how deeply it looks into this character's trauma to show how the effects of abuse or manipulation never go away, even as it seems somebody has moved on from these things, and how somebody can still find this level of comfort in indulging in some of those feelings from the past. Rebecca Hall is masterful in this film. This is just a showcase for her talent as an actress. She should be getting an Oscar nomination. She will not get an Oscar nomination because IFC has this one. I mean, you have like an incredible 6+ minute one take monologue here on her face. The directing's really solid. The writing's really good. Tim Roth is also terrifying in this, but he also underplays it, and that's why it's terrifying. It's the perfect balance for him. Grace Kaufman is excellent as Rebecca Hall's daughter in the movie. And I love how far this film goes down the rabbit hole of her mind. By the end of it, we get into some surreal territory that has made the movie stick with me. And it also made me kind of go back through the movie and wonder something that I won't spoil, that I can't spoil, but it doesn't seem that everybody's been as gripped by this movie as I have, but I think it's worth checking out to see if maybe it will resonate for you, or maybe whether it will resurrect for you. My number 1 is Descendant, a film that is impossible to look away from, and everybody should check this one out. The first thing that struck me about this film is how unfair it is that the people who are affected the most adversely by these injustices of the past are also the ones that have to go out of their way to fight for that preservation. There are many people in the US who believe that the descendants of slavery have really everything they need, all of the tools at their disposal to thrive within the American system. And this is a really damning counter-argument to that viewpoint. It's a real reckoning with the past and how these people were freed, but they were never actually given any land. And so they were still exploited for many years after emancipation. And every generation you go back, you find a world plagued with different challenges. And that leaves us with the one that we have today, which is still a world plagued with many challenges. They are, different. They take different shapes and forms. We see that the same power dynamic exists from the people who were enslaved and the people who enslaved them. Namely, right now, they're struggling to keep the home that they do have, the land that they live on, from being basically bought out. So it shows how capitalism is also just absolutely a brutal force that these people are just powerless to stand up against. And it's because when you accumulate wealth like this,
you become so massively powerful. And in a world where reparations aren't even offered and they can't escape that poverty, you can't just sit around and wait for people to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. Their livelihoods are constantly being threatened. They've always been in this fight. It does a great job looking at the current conversation we should be having around reparations as well, and what that might look like, and how, everybody is sort of struggling with the same question. Like, even the people who feel it is owed to them don't really know what that looks like, but they do offer a little bit of a portrait of that. There's also a really interesting moment when some of the people who are helping to uncover this slave ship are white, and the way that they like react to the discoveries they make, they're like clapping, and then everybody else is like, and it was like an accidental moment that they captured, but it like really stuck with me. White people and, America in general just loves to celebrate, the victories so that we can kind of like tidy up, clean our hands and walk away. But Descendant makes it abundantly clear that many people are not privileged enough to just walk away and then everything is fine and happy. Like, that's the beginning of the journey for them. It's really, really instrumental to understanding where we're at today.
My number one film of Sundance is Cha Cha Real Smooth. Fully understand how original this pick is, considering it won the Audience Award, considering it's gotten all the buzz. But look, I can't deny that I fell in love with this movie while watching it. This movie really wears its heart on its sleeve. A lot of the connections that Cooper Raiff makes in this film, whether, it's with his brother, his mom, with Dakota Johnson's character and her daughter, these connections all really resonated with me. They felt real. And when you get so latched on to characters like that, when you like them so much and when you care about them, it just makes it really easy to be along for their emotional ride. And this movie definitely hits the highs and lows as it goes on, as you might expect a rom-com to do. And some of the conversations really hit hard in this film. It's another great example of this trend that we've been seeing lately of later in life coming of age films. It was also a really interesting look at these two different people and where they're at two different points in their lives and why they can connect and come together, but also what's kind of separating them. So this one just charmed the pants off me. I'd recommend bringing an extra belt.
An extra belt? An extra belt? So if the pants get taken off with the first belt, then you have a second belt.
No,
you don't have a second pair of pants.
You just wear two belts.
It's better than one belt?
Sure
is. It's like double masking.
CDC recommends you wear two belts. Thank you for joining us, not just for this video, but for the whole Sundance journey. Really enjoyed pumping out content for you. And of course, this channel is the reason that we can even attend, which is amazing.
It's all made possible by viewers like you.
Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing.
Which of these picks can you not wait to rush out and see?